Hey, how's it going everyone? I'm White Pointer and it's time to dive into the questions you guys have left in the comments again and figure out how classic video games managed to pull off some impressive effects. What cool tricks and techniques are we going to uncover this time? Let's find out. As we go, why not try to guess the answer yourself before I explain it? How do you think you'll do? Let's get going. We'll start this one off with the NES, as Mr. Guy 4 would like to know how Wily Machine 3 from Mega Man 3 was pulled off. It looks really cool in action and is pretty impressive. Hopefully we don't need to be evil scientists to figure this one out. Let's have a look. So this is the boss fight with Dr. Wily right at the end of the game. It's this huge machine that moves around on legs. How are Capcom making the Nintendo Entertainment System do this? Well, isolating just the sprite layer first, we can see the legs, gun, and Dr. Wily himself when he shows up inside the cockpit are all sprites. So are the projectiles and the gauges at the top of the screen, and you can see there's quite a bit of sprite flicker going on in this fight as the hardware is pushed to its limit. So if all of that is sprites, that means the main body of the machine is a background, which is scrolling left and right and occasionally scrolling up and down when needed. You can also see how the background and sprites interact with each other to make the legs work as they extend and retract. But wait, what about the floor? That's a background too, so why isn't it scrolling with the machine's body? Well, it's our good friend the Nintendo MMC3 chip again, which of course contains a scanline counter. The game's using this to split the background so the machine scrolls and the floor stays static. The floor is on the left name table, the machine is on the right name table. Interestingly, it's splitting it twice. The top portion of the screen, which is completely black, is using the left side, then it switches to the right for the machine, then switches back to the left for the floor. This seems kind of unnecessary. I think they could have just split it once for the floor, as both the machine and the floor have the same black backdrop. But regardless, that's how Dr. Wily managed to build his machine in Mega Man 3. Next, we are travelling across the ocean to look at a rare Japanese exclusive Famicom game, Summer Carnival 92 Recca, and there's actually been a few questions about this one. Spinning Square Waves, Nate RD90, and Ninja Cacodemon is sus want to know how the background in the second level is working, as it seems to be doing a lot of line scrolling and scaling which seemingly shouldn't be possible on the console. Let's check it out. If you've never heard of this game, you might look at the title, Summer Carnival 92 Recca, and reasonably assume that maybe it's some kind of sports game. But no, it's actually a vertical shooter, and a damn difficult one at that. It was developed by a studio named KID, or KID, and published by Naxat Soft, who you might recognise as being responsible for the Crush series of pinball games. For 3 years, from 1991 to 1993, they held a video game competition called Summer Carnival, where they invited players to attend and compete in special games that were created for the event. This footage is from the 1991 edition, and is from the channel Caravan Forever, which I'll leave a link to in the description if you want to check it out. Recca, as it's commonly abbreviated to, was a competition game for the 1992 event, and was also actually the only Famicom game in the 3 years it ran, as all the others were for the PC Engine CD. As such, it was produced in very limited quantities and is extremely rare, with genuine copies worth thousands of dollars, although it is apparently very easy to be fooled into buying a fake or reproduction of it. It's technically quite impressive for the hardware in a number of ways, but the questions are asking about the background effect we see here in Stage 2. There's a warping wave pattern going on, which is something we saw reasonably frequently on the 16-bit consoles, but what about the Famicom? Well, there's really only one way this kind of thing will be possible on the hardware, and that's by using a mapper chip in the cartridge that has a scanline counter, and that's exactly the case here. The mapper is being hit on about 20 scanlines as it goes down the screen, from what I can tell, using it to horizontally offset them by varying amounts and combining it with normal scrolling to create what we see happening in the game. The background artwork itself is pretty simplistic, and is just a pattern made up of purple dots, which is probably deliberate as it might have looked weird or have been too distracting had it been an actual image of something, because remember, this was primarily made as a competition game. We see the effect being used again a little later in the game during this mini-boss fight. this time on a background that has a more defined shape to it, and we can see how distracting it is, especially with all the sprite flicker too. Like Tetristar the Fighter that we looked at in the previous video, this game is missing from NEScardDB's database, making it difficult to confirm exactly what mapper it's using. However, after some searching, I found this forum post on NESdev, and this user, Frank W. Doom, owned a legit copy of the game, and was an absolute champion because he cracked it open and posted photos of the PCB, and we can see it's using the MMC3. Amazing! So that's that mystery solved. Let's now move on to the PC Engine, with this question from Ancient Flounder, who asks, how are the scrolling backgrounds being handled in Ninja Ryūkenden? Smooth scrolling can be seen in cinematics, but for stages, the attempt at parallax scrolling is quite choppy. Let's cut this one down to see what's going on. This particular game is an enhanced port. You might even call it a remaster of Ninja Gaiden that was released exclusively on the Japanese PC Engine. It has a lot of improvements over the NES original in both the graphics and sound departments, but something that doesn't quite hit the mark is very obvious as soon as you begin playing. The attempt at parallax scrolling on the background in the outdoor stages, like stage 1-1 and 2-2, doesn't quite seem to hit the mark and looks quite jarring. The PC Engine, or TurboGrafx-16, only had one background layer, so how did they try to pull this off on the hardware, and why doesn't it really work? I think the effect they were trying to go for here is for the distant background to stay in place, or at least scroll very slowly, while the closer background scrolls faster as the player moves. We have seen some games do something similar to this on this console in past videos. For example, Night Creatures here. It's not a particularly good game, it must be said, but it does pull this kind of effect off much more convincingly, albeit with simpler backgrounds. It does this with the use of animated tiles. The tiles that make up the parts that are supposed to be further away are animated to move when the player does, creating the illusion of multiple background layers. But going back to Ninja Ryūkenden, that doesn't seem to be what's going on here. In this game, these tiles are not animated. Normally, the background would scroll in the opposite direction the player is moving, and that's what the close background does. But with the far background, they're shifting the tiles in the direction the player is moving, but they can only do this a tile's width at a time, which is why it looks so jerky and ends up just being a bit of an eyesore and quite distracting. Luckily, it's only in these outdoor stages. The interiors are all fine, but it's an unfortunate blemish on what is otherwise a very good version of the game. Next up, we have a question that was left by I Will Scoop, which has taken me a while to get to, so my apologies for that, but they ask, in Mortal Kombat 2, how is the Pit 2 fatality done for the SNES, Genesis and Arcade? This would be a pretty quick one, so let's get a flawless victory and uppercut this off the list. I gotta say, Mortal Kombat 2 is one of my favourite arcade games of all time. I think the gameplay is great, the character roster is great, and it just expands so well on the original. I can still beat the game on a single credit after all these years.
No one believes I beat the last level of Mortal Kombat.
Because that's just ridiculous. No one beats Sub-Zero.
The arcade original version of Mortal Kombat 2 ran on Midway's T-Unit hardware, which had built-in hardware scaling and rotation capabilities thanks to its splitter-based graphics processor. This is the same arcade board that was used in NBA Jam, which uses these features quite extensively for screen transitions and also to scale the players larger and smaller as they move towards or away from the camera. With that in mind, it's pretty easy to see how they could trivially create the effect for the Pit 2 fatality in Mortal Kombat 2. On the Super Nintendo, it's also pretty easy. The game utilises Mode 7 to replicate the effect quite faithfully. That shouldn't really shock anyone. The Mega Drive version is probably the most interesting of the three that we're looking at here because it lacked any kind of hardware scaling. So how's it done on Sega's machine? Well, if we isolate the relevant plane and slow it down enough, we can see what it's doing. The background is made up of a repeating pattern, and they're swapping in a new version of it that has a larger variation of the pattern as the character falls. At full speed, it looks a lot smoother, though obviously not as fluid as the Super Nintendo version. Moving on to a Mega Drive exclusive, Use of Thanksters says they were wondering how they pulled off the scaling and rotation effects in Thunder Force 4's continue screen. I know you've been asking this question for a while, so sorry for the delay in getting to this one, but let's take a look at it now. I'm sure we'll find this one enlightening. If you're from North America, there's probably a good chance you haven't heard of a game called Thunder Force 4, because it was released in your region under the peculiar name of Lightning Force, Quest for the Dark Star. Yes, not Lightning Force, but Lightning Force, with an added E in there. This actually isn't the result of a bad translation, this is 100% the fault of Sega of America, because they decided they wanted to rename it to something edgy and forgot to check their spelling. Lightening is actually a real word, meaning to make something brighter, or reduced in weight, or to make a mood happier. It's also a medical term to refer to a specific stage in pregnancy. So maybe their spell checkers didn't flag it at the time, but they clearly didn't mean lightening and obviously intended it to be lightning. Considering Thunder Force 2 and 3 were both released under those unaltered names, you'd think they want to keep that pattern going for brand recognition. It was really an unnecessary change in the first place, made worse by a silly spelling error that nobody at Sega of America managed to spot before it was printed. There's even a fancy animation of it on the in-game title screen, and it's right there on the high score screen. Like, seriously, how did nobody notice this? Despite the weirdness in the name, it's often considered one of the best horizontal shoot-'em-ups, not just on the Mega Drive, but of the entire 16-bit generation. It's a technically quite impressive game, with lots of cool effects going on, but the question is asking about the continue screen. I guess that's one of the easiest things to check, cause you just need to die a few times, which isn't hard to do in a game like this. Once we get there, we can see the game logo appearing on screen 20 times, and doing a funky animation where it appears to scale, stretching and contracting on either the horizontal axis, vertical axis, or both. That's pretty neat. How's the game doing that? Firstly, this is all being done using animated tiles on the foreground plane. Isolating the tiles in VRAM, we can see how they are specifically set up to animate in this pre-baked repeating pattern. Now, there's two ways this could be happening. It's either pulling individual frames of animation from the ROM, or it's controlled entirely in code. Which option do you think it is? It's the latter. It's being done in code. The game has specific code set up that removes or restores columns and or rows of pixels from each tile making up the logo in order to contract or stretch the image respectively, either on the x-axis, y-axis, or both at the same time. Note that it's not using a raster effect to remove or restore horizontal lines like we often see on the Mega Drive. Instead, a single software routine handles both axes, mathematically generating these tile transformations fresh every frame, and then copying the results to VRAM during VBlank before drawing them to the screen. This might sound pretty CPU heavy, and it is, but keep in mind that besides this effect, there's not a whole lot happening on this screen. There's a static background image, some text with a countdown timer, and that's it. So there's really not much else for the Motorola 68000 CPU to be doing. In addition to that, the logo is stored in its full size in the ROM, but even at full size, it's pretty small, only 8 tiles wide by 6 tiles tall, or 64 pixels by 48 pixels, so it only ever needs to be processing 3072 pixels for a single instance, which easily fits into the CPU's budget with room to spare. It also never needs to do any additional complex pixel duplication logic, because it never gets any bigger than its original native size. You'll notice that all 20 instances of this scaling logo are synchronized and doing the same animation. Because these are background tiles, they only need to be calculated and written like this in VRAM once per frame. Then they can be drawn to screen as part of the tile map as many times as the developer's Technosoft wanted, provided they all fit. This avoids any real restrictions like there would be if these were sprite tiles instead. And yes, Lightning Force does this same animation as well, and still nobody seemed to spot the spelling mistake. Sticking with the Mega Drive, we have this question from Mars Caleb. In Arcus Odyssey, after the intro cutscene, the title zooms in. How exactly do they scale the title on Genesis hardware? And could that same effect have been used on the map screen to zoom in on the map? Interesting question. Let's zoom in to take a closer look. Here's how the title screen appears in Arcus Odyssey once the intro cinematic is complete. The logo does a very nice looking zoom in effect as it appears on screen. So what's going on with this one? Time to take a look at the tiles in VRAM again, which are once again being manipulated, as it's doing a form of software scaling and gradually becoming larger. I don't think this is programmed real-time scaling with some kind of linear or nearest neighbor algorithm this time, because if you watch it in slow motion, it's not a smooth effect, and there are noticeable jumps from one size to the next. So I believe in this case that it's a pre-prepared animation that is pulling the different sizes from the ROM. I'm not 100% certain about that though, so I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments what you think. As for the second part of the question, I doubt this could have been used to zoom the world map, at least not the same way the Super Famicom version Arcus Spirits does, given the large amount of unique tiles that would have been needed in order to do so. Next up, Rob NHW says they always found the spinning globe in the menu of Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing impressive, and wants to know how it's done. He doesn't specify what platform he's talking about here, and this game was released on just about everything available at the time. However, for the purposes of this video, we'll just look at two of them, the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo. I wanted to make a Formula 1 joke, but I had too many options racing through my head. I owned this game on the Super Nintendo back in the day, and I remember playing it quite a lot, and it pretty much kickstarted my interest in Formula 1 as a motorsport. Even though I can admit the game has flaws, and there were better games available at the time, I still had a lot of fun with it. We don't need to start playing the game properly to see the effect the question is asking about though, we just need to go to the track selection screen from the main menu. Once we are there, we can see this cool looking spinning globe of the world, which actually looks kinda 3D. It also looks extremely similar between the two consoles, but it's actually being done in two completely different ways. We'll start with the Mega Drive, and this is honestly a really unusual looking setup. Firstly, the background you see that makes up most of the screen is actually all on the window plane. Yes, you heard that right, the optional subplane of the foreground plane that's normally used to display static screen elements like HUDs is actually being used here on the entire screen to draw the background. It does this on all of the game's menu screens actually, not just this one. It's not doing anything that a normal foreground plane can't do, so I'm not entirely sure why they chose to do this. If you have any theories, be sure to leave them in the comments. The actual spinning globe is being done entirely on the background plane as a pre-baked animation. It's doing this by using animated tiles, which we can see in action if we isolate the tiles currently in memory. The 3D look is achieved with the animation combined with some clever shading. The marker on the map that indicates the location of the track is a sprite that moves in sync with the animation. The Super Nintendo goes about this in a very different way. It's running in mode 1 with 3 background layers available. It's drawing the main background to layer 2, which isn't too shocking, but layer 1 has this weird static greenish yellow sphere on it, while layer 3 appears to be completely blank and unused. It gets even weirder if we look at the sprite layer, because this contains a static blue sphere. We can also see the map marker is a sprite here too. What the heck's going on here? Well, the key here is layer 3, it's not actually blank. It contains a hidden animation of the spinning globe, but it's made up of transparent tiles. If we switch to grayscale, it now becomes visible. Like the Mega Drive version, this animation is done using animated tiles, which we can see by isolating them in VRAM. So that's what all of the layers look like when they are separated, which is a big part of the puzzle, but it's not the entire solution. There's still the question of how all those things are combining in that way to make what we see in the final game. It's being done with clever use of the color mass hardware. Background layer 3 and the sprite layer are on the main screen, which combine together to look like this. Background layer 1 and 2 are on the subscreen, combining together to look like this. Color addition is then applied between the main screen and the subscreen, and that's how we get to the final image that we see the SNES rendering to the screen. Two different consoles, two different techniques, very similar end results. Who would have thought that this much effort would go into a simple menu animation? Interestingly, despite the effort that was made to make these menus almost identical, the actual gameplay itself is a bit different. The Super Nintendo uses a first-person view like most of the other versions do, but the Mega Drive version uses a third-person view. Aquarius Turtle asks, how was Revolution X made on the SNES? There are so many places that look like they do scaling and rotation with seemingly many layers. No point in living on the edge. Walk this way and I'll show you how it's done. You don't want to miss a thing, just push play. I remember when Revolution X came out. I'm a Generation X myself, and this game was aimed squarely at me at the time, and it was a pretty big deal. Or at least they tried to make it a big deal. It was a relatively straightforward gallery shooter in the arcades, but it wasn't really anything special apart from the fact that it featured rock band Aerosmith. The question is asking about the scaling effects that are seen throughout the game on the Super Nintendo version, like we see with the helicopter here right at the start of the game, as well as regular enemies when they move towards you. The actual backgrounds are all Mode 7, so no real surprises that this is how they are scaling, but what about all the sprites? You might remember in a video earlier in this How Did They Do That series, I covered the SNES port of Art of Fighting and how that game was scaling its characters in conjunction with Mode 7 backgrounds. Revolution X is actually using exactly the same technique. It's taking the sprite tiles for the enemies and overlapping them slightly in order to make them smaller, and reversing that process to restore them back again. As I mentioned in that previous video, there is a limit to how far you can overlap them without it looking weird. You can see they get very close to that line with the helicopter. While it retains its general shape, the writing on it does look a bit strange, such as the number 88 merging together down into a single 8 when it gets smaller and splitting apart again when it gets bigger. Interestingly, the programmer behind this conversion, Kent Murray, who goes by the tag Evolvic, dropped by to leave a comment on that video covering Art of Fighting. He confirms every enemy sprite in Revolution X uses this scaling technique, and he wasn't aware any other games actually did the same thing. So there you go, thank you for that input, Kent. It's always an honour when devs drop in and contribute to the discussion. For the record, even though the Mega Drive was totally capable of doing this as well, there's no scaling in that port at all. Oddly enough, the Super Nintendo port had blood in it when you shot enemies. Not much, but it's there, while the Mega Drive version actually didn't have blood at all. It's kind of a strange world when Nintendo had more blood than Sega. Overall, I'm not gonna lie, this version of the game isn't great, not helped by the fact that it doesn't support the Super Scope. It does support the Super Nintendo mouse if you have one. Kind of. Unfortunately, a design flaw means the same button used to shoot also pauses the game, so it's not really usable, forcing you to use the D-pad. This version also has a fair bit of slowdown. To be honest, neither version is a particularly good port of an arcade game that was already pretty average, but because of the added blood, the scaling effects and sampled music tracks, I'd probably give the slight edge to the SNES version over the Mega Drive version. Finally, Andy Malone has a question about a whole game. They say, we know what happened with the Drive-In series on SNES, but how did the game Star Trek, Starfleet Academy, Starship Reach Simulator manage so much polygonal 3D without Super FX support and have it run so smoothly? Let's boldly go where no one has gone before and see what's happening here. This is a game that you've probably at least heard of, even if you've never played it, not just because of its unusually long name, but also because it's one of the few Super Nintendo games that uses true 3D polygons for actual gameplay without the use of the Super FX chip, and does it quite well. So how's it managing to do that, when other games that attempted this, like the port of Race Driving that the question mentioned, ran so poorly? Race Driving chugs along at only about 3 to 4 frames a second and is barely playable, while Starship Reach Simulator manages a respectable 10 to 11 frames a second and plays just fine. We'll look at the most obvious thing first, and that's the fact that the actual polygon usage is pretty minimal. They aren't trying to cover the whole screen in polygons, you usually just see a single enemy ship at a time. They are also restricted to a pretty small viewable area with an entirely black background. The dots for the stars you can see are all sprites. This works because you're supposed to be in a combat training simulator, and the rest of the screen is the interior of the facility. It's not something you might immediately think about when playing, but it's pretty smart visual design, which looks good, makes sense in the context of the game and the universe it's based on, and improves the performance. The game is once again running in Mode 1, but the third layer is only utilised every now and then to draw text to the screen. Layer 1 contains the animated crew, and Layer 2 is the facility interior and space viewport where the polygons are. The other clever thing it's doing is how it's actually rendering the polygons themselves behind the scenes. These are the tiles the polygons are being drawn with, and we can see there's actually 2 sets of them stored in VRAM, set up as a kind of frame buffer. The game only draws one of them to the screen at once, updating the other in the background and switching between the 2 sets of tiles in VRAM every 5 or 6 frames. We've sometimes seen these pseudo frame buffers done using multiple background tile maps before, but this game is doing it with just one tile map and multiple sets of background tiles. They have the space in VRAM to be able to do this, once again, due to the simplicity in how the rest of the scene is set up. To provide some extra performance, the game also makes use of fast ROM, so the CPU is running at its maximum potential speed. Although there's no textures on the polygons, they are actually utilising directional lighting based shading, which is an awesome detail they managed to add to this already impressive technical feat. So that's another video done. Thank you for really helping to turn this into a great retro gaming community. Many of these questions are about stuff that I would have never thought to cover on my own, and it's really been a fascinating journey of discovery for me, and hopefully you as well. Keep the questions coming, and please be patient if I haven't got to yours yet. Give me a thumbs up if you liked this video, it really helps a lot, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with my content. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.